So, hello and welcome to the second of this interview series with members of our team here at the Royal Observatory, Greenwich. And I'm here with our astronomy education assistant, Jake Foster, here in the Great Equatorial Telescope Dome at the observatory with our wonderful 130-year-old Victorian-era Great Equatorial Telescope in the background. So, couldn't have asked for a better setting, absolutely. So, hello, Jake.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking to you a little bit today about the role that you have here. You're actually the most recent addition to our team. How long have you actually been working here?
So I've been here for about 3 months so far. I started in November, and already in that time I've had the great pleasure and opportunity of presenting some planetarium shows, workshops, both to schools and to the public. So it's just been a whirlwind, but a pleasant whirlwind.
That's good to hear. Even though, of course, almost all of it has happened working from home, of course, because we've all been working from home during this period.
That's right.
Very, very few exceptions like today when we've actually been able to get on site. Yes,
absolutely. This being here is not a usual experience for me at the moment.
Indeed.
Unfortunately.
So bearing in mind that we are, of course, working from home at the moment, what's your role actually entail? What are you doing day to day?
So as the astronomy education assistant, I do get to deliver workshops and planetarium shows to schools and to the public, along with the rest of the team. But on top of that, I do a lot of behind-the-scenes coordination. So that's things like making sure everything is organized and running along with GCSE astronomy courses that we run, and also teacher training sessions that we run as well. And
actually that's a really interesting point, that these teacher training sessions is something that people at home might not actually realise that we do. So we actually run educator training sessions as well. So what's all about?
Yes, so I mean, teaching difficult topics in science, especially astronomy, can be filled with tricky topics and misconceptions. And what we do in our sessions is we just try to help sort of lift the fog around those misconceptions and tricky topics that kids inevitably will ask, because they're great questions. Why, how does this work? The phases of the moon, the solar eclipses, what's going on, lunar eclipses. So we just try to help smooth that process along, because those questions are coming. So we want to make sure everyone is prepared for them.
Absolutely. Now, before you were working here at the observatory, as I understand, you were working at the Science Museum in London?
That's right, yes. So I was working as an explainer for about a year. So that was just incredibly fun as a role. So that's entirely public facing. So it's being on gallery to provide explanations of exhibits, to provide or to perform demos and shows. So specifically for me, I got to perform a demo which was setting off a 1 million volt Tesla coil and producing indoor lightning, which is just incredible fun.
That must be stunning, yeah.
It's amazing. It's like setting off a wild tiger on stage, and then you just get to watch everyone's reactions.
Yeah.
So that's loads of fun. And then on top of that, just like the Royal Observatory, which also has an incredible collection, the Science Museum has, of course, the Apollo 10 command module, which we do object explanations in front of, which just meant standing in front of Apollo 10. And as people walk by, you kind of say, "It's Apollo 10," and talk about it for 40 minutes, which is just endless fun.
Yeah.
Though one thing, of course, given the state of the world that we're living in right now, a lot of that time was spent on furlough. So unfortunately, our doors were closed for about 5 months. And it was in that time, actually, where I found or rekindled a love of astronomy, because, of course, I had 5 months off trying to find something to keep myself occupied.
Yeah.
And living up in South Norfolk, where the light pollution is very low, and there's starry skies when the clouds aren't around. So I actually took up astronomy then more as a as a hobby as opposed to just as a student. And that I found, because I got myself a telescope, of course, around, I think this is around April sort of time, and just night after night went out into the field, literally out to a field to look up at the stars, because I thought to myself, I've learned so much about what's up there. I know a little bit about how it works, but I've rarely looked up there myself.
Yes.
So I took it upon myself to do that. Given as well, astronomy is one of the few COVID-safe hobbies you can still have, as long as you stay within your local area. Yeah. And that was an incredible thing to do, because as well, I learned to love astronomy not just as a student, but as an observer and as a stargazer. So yeah, a lot of the past year working at the Science Museum was spent instead out in a field looking up at the stars.
Yeah, and this isn't something that you've really done before. So had you been interested in astronomy a long time before that? Or?
I would say for me, it's sort of been more of a slow burn, more of a gradual process in terms of coming to love physics and astronomy. I still remember the first time I was really engaged by a school science experiment. I must have been about 14 at the time, and it was the most simple demonstration you can do. It was just a Newton disk, which is just a color wheel with all the primary colors in segments around the outside, and a little electric motor which spins the wheel. And as you turn on the motor and the wheel begins to spin, from your own perspective, it looks like the colors begin to bleed into one another, and then eventually it turns completely white. And I remember seeing that and thinking, well, that's a little bit like a magic trick. And that was the first time where I thought, oh, there's something in this that I like. And from there, I went to study for A-levels and took physics and maths and also geography, just because geography is great too. And it went from there.
So you then turned this budding interest in science into an actual degree. Where did you go and do that, and what's your degree on?
Yes, so I studied physics with astronomy at the University of Surrey. So I was there from 2014 to 2018. And that was just a great 4-year experience to learn all the different crazy, mind-boggling aspects of physics, with then a focus in final year on astronomy-based modules. Yeah. Though, I would say astronomy was my favorite and main focus during the degree. Probably then, in a close second place, nuclear physics. But then in final year, we had a module called nuclear astrophysics, which was a perfect marriage of the two. But yeah, it was a great time.
And do you find any other parts of science that were particularly interesting to you as well then?
I'd say astronomy is the main one, and cosmology, I suppose, as well. I love just the mind-boggling discussions you can have about the evolution of the universe, the size and scale of the universe, and the possible futures of how things will end up ending or not ending. Multiverse theory, string theory, mad things, mind-boggling. But it's all good. It's all good stuff.
So at that point, you actually went on to do something a little bit different to most of the rest of us here at the observatory. Before we get onto that, when you finished your degree, did you consider the possibility of continuing on in academia, specifically maybe going on to do a PhD or research, something on those sort of lines?
I definitely considered it. I think when you're, within academia, you definitely think, how far can I take this? So I definitely considered it. I think as well, the thing about a PhD specifically that is so exciting is, you hear people talk about this a lot, is that, of course, the PhD is a new piece of research. So, at some point during your PhD, you will know something that no one else in the world knows, even if for a brief moment, and that is incredibly exciting. So, of course, Yeah, it's definitely a thing that you think about. But I mean, for now, I've fallen in love with science communication and outreach, public engagement, and it means that I get to talk about this stuff and be in this room occasionally. So for now, this is where I'd like to see myself.
So you decided to actually go on to do a master's, but rather than a master's specifically in physics, astronomy, which is what most people here at the observatory did, you chose science communication.
Yes, so I chose to take the path of talking about science rather than researching it. I picked the fun bit. But that was a fantastic year in which we got to learn so many different aspects of science communication as an industry and its role in society as well. All of the theories that there are, but also a lot of practical elements. So we got to try our hand at science writing, at broadcasting on radio, television. We got to dip our toes in the water of science communication, which was just a lot of fun and a great excuse to spend a year in Bristol as well, which is a great place.
And so that must have provided some really valuable experience and knowledge that some of the rest of the people on our team, although we do this on a day-to-day basis, and we haven't looked into the theory of science communication, that sort of thing. So this must be a really unique thing, a unique opportunity.
Well, I'd certainly like to think so. I think one thing that I certainly took away from the course is just how important of an industry this is. So science communication, when it's done well, bridges the gap between the scientific community and the general public, which often can seem like quite a large gap.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we are doing the important role of making complex topics accessible, digestible, and enjoyable, and hopefully inspiring young people to want to take up these subjects, which at first glance seem quite intimidating and complex. So it's an incredibly important role, and more broadly speaking, a quite notable percentage of science funding in this country comes from the public. So it is important to, communicate back to the public what their money has been spent on and why it's important.
Yeah.
And as well as that, in certain fields of science communication, there is a particular focus on making sure that the public are aware of how important this research is, because if it is seen as not being a priority, then the science budget will shrink a little bit. When we do planetarium shows and workshops, the feedback we get is incredible. People not only are educated by good science communication, but they enjoy it. It is really fun. Science is fun, but part of the skill that goes into science communication is finding a way to show people that it's fun, because it doesn't always seem fun on the surface. It can seem intimidating and scary because they're big topics, but that's part of what we do, and hopefully people enjoy it. So, there's so many different aspects and different ways you can go with science communication, and what that course gave me certainly was just a knowledge of the different ways you can go with it. I mean, it's led me into the museum industry sort of by accident, but I didn't know that jobs like this existed really before I did that course. So I'm incredibly grateful that I did it.
And it's an unfortunate fact of reality that sometimes the people who are doing this extremely important research are not necessarily the best people to be communicating that research out to other people. So some people are better at communication, some people are better at research, some people are better at all sorts of different things. It's not anyone's fault, it's just that's where they're
Yes, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Scientists are probably well, of course they're the best people to communicate their work, but they're very busy as well a lot of the time, or their mind, is focused on the research, so there's not always the time or the resources to communicate that. So that is where I feel we can help spread the good word. Genuinely, yeah.
So is it part of science communication that particularly interests you? Is written science communication the bit you love, or is it presenting to the live public, or pre-records, or that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, I guess it's a bit of a cop-out of an answer, but I do like the idea of trying a lot of different things. I mean, initially I was definitely drawn to science writing. And I've been lucky enough to write for a couple of publications and write science articles voluntarily over the course of several lockdowns. But, well, what I've accidentally found myself in is the museum industry and now public performance. So science communication through that medium, which I didn't know that I would enjoy until I did it. I mean, I'm not a fan of public speaking per se, but I've found it incredibly enjoyable actually doing it over and over again and building up some confidence with it. So,
and interestingly, I seem to remember you saying it was the one module of your Psychon Masters you didn't actually do. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. So, out of the optional modules, I chose science writing and science on air and screen, and science in public spaces I didn't actually do. But I'm sure if I did do it, I would have some valuable information now that would help me with this job.
Well, you seem to be doing fine at the moment, so that's good. So do you have any advice for a young person getting into physics or astronomy at the moment? How could they advance further in it?
Well, so if for a young person who is perhaps choosing their GCSEs right now, or choosing their A-levels and is considering physics or astronomy, I would say, well, first of all, I would say go for it. If you enjoy it, or you feel like you could enjoy it, I would say go for it. But in terms of practical advice, I would say if you're like me when I was young and didn't enjoy maths, I would say make a concerted effort to find the fun in maths, because physics and astronomy is full of maths. You can't get away from it, so you have to enjoy it. So I would say try and find something to make maths enjoyable. So I try to think of maths more like puzzle solving, first with numbers, and then later with letters, and then for a little while with symbols as well. So I would say try and find the fun in maths, because you can't get away from it. The physics parts can seem quite inherently interesting, but the maths is more difficult to find the fun in. So I'd say find the fun in maths. Well, yeah, I mean, maths has this wonderful certainty and this comforting certainty in our very uncertain world. That, with maths, you're like, oh, okay, it's correct. That equation will always be correct. It's fine. Now I don't have to worry about it anymore. But yeah, I think as well as that, especially another piece of advice, just for someone who's considering studying astronomy, I would say begin now to take an interest in coding and in computing, because more and more you need that skill. Yeah. And it can take a little while to get used to. I didn't take naturally to computing or coding, so look into it and get a head start on coding. That's what I would say.
Jake, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
We will be back with another interview with one of our astronomers very soon.